Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. Hope this is a helpful space and time for all of you attending. My name is Ben Weissman. I am the graduate assistant in the Office of Fellowships, and I am a PhD student in the School of Music here at Northwestern in the musicology program. But primarily, I am here as the host of this panel where you will get to hear about grad school from the Presidential Fellows that are here with their videos on and unmuted before you. And about the halfway mark in this meeting, my goal is to switch things over to answering questions that you are posing in chat. So whenever you think of a question, even before we get going here, that you would be interested in hearing the answer to, please don't hesitate to write it in chat, and we will go through those in the second half of the meeting. So with that brief introduction, just one point of order. This is being recorded, so you know, and this is for posterity. If you have friends that couldn't be here or you want to reference back in the future, it will be on our website in the future. So that all out of the way, I'm going to briefly hand things off to Beth, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Beth Pardo. I direct the Office of Fellowships, and this is one of my favorite, if not my favorite event of the year. And not only because Ben has done all the work and I just get to come along for the ride, but also because it's historically been one of the most transformative experiences for some of our undergraduate advisees, that they get to hear from these brilliant graduate students about the myriad ways that they have made their life choices and create their lives as graduate students. And so I am thrilled that they were willing to give up some of their time on their spring breaks. And I'm thrilled that so many of you made the wise decision to join us while you're on spring break. And I hope this is the first of many conversations with all of you. I know some of these Presidential Fellows from their earlier engagements with our office. I know some of you from those, but I want this to be the beginning of new relationships as you think about what you want to do with your futures as potential graduate students and otherwise. So with that, I hand off to Ben and let the fun begin.
Thank you, Beth. So I am going to, I want to start us off. I very briefly introduced myself, but I'm hoping that I am a conduit for the things that the fellows will be sharing. So I'm going to now hand it off for each of the Presidential Fellows to share name, how you identify, if you care to share that, your program, and a brief little summary of your research, something particularly compelling about what you've been working on lately, maybe. We'll just go round robin. Can we, for the sake of arbitrary order, can we use the last name letter first, alphabetical or something like that? So would that be okay?
Yes, I think it means I'm up.
I think so. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Adamako, and I am a fifth-year PhD candidate in African American Studies. I use she, her pronouns, and my research, so my research focuses on Black writers in the 1960s and 70s in the United States and Ghana, and how they wrote about Black friendship through figurations of Black girlhood, and what that reveals around political affiliation, what it means about like community building and relationship building, and how they articulate theories of difference using friendship as a constant thematic in their literary works. So yeah, that is me, and I look forward to speaking with you all and answering some questions.
Hi, I'm Laura Ferdinand. I'm a seventh year in the PhD program. It's called the Interdisciplinary PhD in Theater and Drama. And my research interrogates representations of Black womanhood in revisionist histories of the US South, which historicizes the ongoing relationship between white middle-class women and systemic racism. And moreover, I analyzed specific practices that attempted to bring white-sanctioned representations of Black womanhood to life. I use she, her pronouns. And was there anything else I was meant to include? Okay, great, thanks.
everybody. My name is Sheridan Fuller. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate in the Human Development and Social Policy program in CESP. So it's nice to see all of you. My research is around income support programs, loosely referred to as the social safety net. So I look at what are the long-term impacts of family and children's access to cash assistance programs when children are young. How does it impact their developmental trajectories? And I specifically look at policies that impact whether or not families are able to access programs or how much they're able to access. And an important through line of studying those policies are policies that are generally viewed as racialized. They kind of emerge out of a stereotype around Black and Brown families access to income support programs. And so I look at how those who is impacted by those policies when they're implemented. How does it impact their ability to access? If it does, what does it mean for children's developmental trajectory? And so it contributes to policy debates now around programs like the child care tax credit and other social safety net programs. So.
Hi, everyone. I am Sarah Lloyd. I use she, her pronouns. I am a sixth year in the interdisciplinary biological sciences program, and I specifically work in the field of molecular biology. My research is studying human skin, and I look at how our human skin is controlled at the level of our DNA. So our skin actually has adult stem cells in it that have to constantly turn themselves over and differentiate into our outer layers of skin. So big picture, that's kind of what my research is focused on, but more in the very direct sense of looking at how the DNA is controlled.
Hi, everyone. My name is Charlotte, she, her. I'm a sixth year in the history department, and my research is on broadly the history of US mass incarceration, more specifically on the history of prisons and prisoner resistance in late 20th century Pennsylvania. I'm kind of interested in this crisis of prison overcrowding, and specifically kind of thinking about how this crisis in prison overcrowding, I want to argue, pose major challenges to kind of like a burgeoning carceral state, and perhaps could have led to, if not a reversal of mass incarceration, at least very much kind of like a reduction in its impact. So kind of thinking about the contingency of that moment. So yeah, excited to be here today.
Hi, I'm Suna Zekiolu. I'm a fourth year PhD candidate in the Department of Physics and Astronomy. I'm specifically on the physics side. I'm in particle physics. My research is really studying the fundamental forces like gravity and the sort of interactions that hold our nuclei together, and trying to understand the connections between those interactions. So really what I do is I use like direct calculations, either by hand or on my computer, to help figure out the connections between these forces in the hopes of describing gravitational interactions with higher precision, like black hole in spiral. And also I work on methods that are hopefully going to be useful for parameterizing new possible particle physics we might observe someday from the collisions happening at the LHC.
Thank you, everyone. And for the sake of the interdisciplinarity of this, I study musicology, and what that means is I study experimental vocal music and how it combines with giant funding philanthropic organizations, new age philosophical ideas in the 1970s, and early computer music research, and how those forces sort of come together in Cold War cultural politics in the United States, especially focused in California. So with those introductions, I want to just reaffirm that as you think of questions, please type them in chat and we will arrive at them, and I will pose them to the fellows on the second half of this talk. And briefly, because I don't think we have yet, what is a presidential fellow? That it's an internal Northwestern University grant specifically given to doctoral students. There are very few that are given this each year. It comes with a fair bit of money to continue your research and do what you need to do within your program. So the question of why are the presidential fellows, the people on this panel, these are handpicked people and within Northwestern's graduate school that have been given the seal of approval of doing really cool research, more or less. So with that, I think I'd like to now open it up to the first question. I'll post this in chat as well so that, because I am a visual learner. And I'll ask it before I post it. How did you decide to go to grad school, and how did you select your grad program in particular? And perhaps in retrospect, what might have factored into your decision that was not at the time? So sort of, how did you decide on your program? How did you select, what factors were you maybe considering in that decision-making process? And I'm going to set the precedent now that if you have an answer to it, I'd love for you to unmute and jump right in.
Okay, we're not doing alphabetical anymore.
Sorry, yes. So what I said to panelists before, just before the meeting that I'll repeat now, is don't feel the need to answer every question. Please do just jump in. There's frankly, anyway, things will balance itself out if a couple of people don't answer one question, but everyone wants to answer another one is my thinking. So yes, please go right ahead if you have an answer.
Sounds good. I can answer that one. So I didn't know grad school was a thing that people did commonly. No one in my family had really done it other than a master's program. And my undergrad was very small, only undergraduate institution. And the way I realized I wanted to do graduate research was by doing research. And I mean that in the sense of I joined a lab and started doing research and got a feel for if I really enjoyed it. And that's actually how I decided to do a PhD instead of doing an MD, was I found I really actually enjoyed being in the physical lab space and doing the research and asking those questions myself. So actually going out to find experiences that will answer those questions and help you find what you truly like to do is a much better way to kind of figure it out than just reading about it. If you can find ways to experience things, I think that's a great way.
I can add on, similar to Sarah, I had no clue really about graduate school. I come from an immigrant background. My family's from Ghana in West Africa. They don't have a lot of higher education. And so when I was in college, I double majored in Africana studies and human rights. And I was kind of interested in, I was interested in a whole bunch of things, to be honest. But I was taking these kind of classes that were interdisciplinary in nature, kind of in the realm of like ethnic studies and things. And I think I just had questions. The concept of childhood really appealed to me in college. And I was like, this thing, childhood, I never thought about it as a concept. Apparently race and gender and all these historical factors matter into what we think of as a child. I want to like learn about this more. And I became a Mellon Mays undergraduate fellow, which I'm sure some folks here are familiar with because I know Northwestern has a program. And that's when I really started learning more about like, oh, what is this whole higher education things? Okay, my professors have PhDs. What does that mean? Thinking about what it means to be like a woman and a Black person in higher ed. I started to have those conversations, and I think I was really intrigued about this whole other professional world that I never really thought about it. So I really started talking to professors and talking to people who had went through the experience. So a combination of all those things and the idea of continuing education and getting paid for it all sounded seductive. And I'm sure we'll talk more later on about being disillusioned in different ways, but it was still like, okay, I could get a steady income. I could still be like learning, possibly teaching. It just felt like a career path that was really exciting for me and mysterious at the same time. So that's how I ended up here.
Yeah, I'll also share like just another pathway. So before I came to grad school, and I would say like there's something wrong with like working for a little bit first. So like I worked for a couple of years in the Bay Area in the realm of like affordable housing. So doing affordable housing, organizing and advocacy work. And I think for me, what really kind of like pushed me, so on the one hand, I was a history major in college, so I sort of like was familiar with the discipline, but I think what really stuck out for me was like doing this intensive policy work at the local level, like seeing how, there were all these really good ideas on the table, but being constantly sort of frustrated by these really entrenched structures, whether that be like the city council or these different like redevelopment agency type of entities, right? And also just seeing how many of the policies that were on the table, even though they're well-intentioned, right, they interact with particular, developments, institutions, structures that are already in place, right, because of like prior historical policymaking, prior politics, right? And so for me, it was like, I felt like, and again, there's nothing wrong with policy work. Policy work is really important, but I think for me, I was just like, I don't feel like I can make the impact I want to make unless I sort of like get to the bottom of what is going on here. And my hope, even today, right, and when I started, was to sort of find ways to ideally kind of translate what I'm finding, in the archives and in doing this historical work, for people who are out there kind of making that policy, doing that organizing, et cetera. So I think just to kind of also chart another pathway to this, and to say there's really nothing wrong with like kind of going out there, seeing what's up with the world, and then yeah, if you're still kind of like hungry for more, then you can always apply for grad school. So yeah.
I can speak a bit to the second part of your question, which is how did you pick the profession for you or the program for you? I'd like to get a small sense though of the students that are interested, sort of, even if it's very vaguely, in graduate school, if they're interested in the sciences, humanities, arts. So if you can put like the party symbol, like, hey, oh my gosh, humanities, up in your window, I can get a sense of that. And if you do art, what are the other reaction choices? Why don't you just cry? No, the laugh cry, just so I can get a sense. And then science, you don't have to do anything. And I want to get a sense of this just because the advice that I would give is quite different. Not really seeing anything though, so it seems potentially like it's largely sciences here. Okay. Okay, I see a few humanities. Wonderful. So when I was picking my program, I didn't know a lot about graduate school, especially in my field, theater and drama, and or performance studies. Some of those things are lumped together in graduate programs, and some of the programs are distinct. So Northwestern is really one of the best programs for theater, drama, and performance studies in the United States, but I didn't know that. You sort of have to be an insider to know that information. So I was just doing a lot of research about the different programs that were available, but how I came to learn about Northwestern is I just spoke to one of my mentors who is the chair of the theater department at Miami University. And she just mentioned, oh, well, I have a student who has gone to Northwestern. There's a great professor there. It's a great program. And so I was just like, write it on the list of the many schools that I ended up applying to. There's a few reasons I ended up choosing Northwestern, which I think elucidate some things that will be useful in thinking about the program you're interested in. One is that it was a paid position. So in a lot of graduate programs, you will provide different work services, usually teaching, oftentimes research as well, especially in the humanities and sciences. So because unlike getting a law degree or a medical degree where there's sort of this clear trajectory of the kind of job you'll get afterward and you can kind of recoup any kind of debt that you would do. When you're dealing with the humanities, I always advise people, if possible, to look for programs that are paid. I think that is a very logical way about going to graduate school. Another reason was the sort of prestige of Northwestern that's really undergirded by them actually being a great school, by actually being a great program, because there is an amount of social capital that goes along with which program you come from, the sort of professors you'll be able to work with, the sort of funding that they have to bring people in, the connections you can make. That is not to say that other schools don't provide excellent educations. They absolutely do. But if you have a choice, this is one of the factors that you can weigh, is that sort of clout of the program or how it stands in the field. Another thing was the well-being of the students that are already there. This was a recommendation my sibling gave me. She was the first in our family to go to graduate school. And she was like, just check in on everyone's mental health and like, make sure they're all cool. So one thing is, if you have the opportunity to go to the school, a lot of them will bring you in for an interview. It's really great to talk to the other students and kind of assess, you know, how they're doing, because it can tell you a lot about the culture of the program and the kind of resources they have to support their students. Obviously, there's all those different considerations. How far away will you be from your family? You know, can you handle the climate? Can you handle being in an urban environment, etc.? Is there anything else though? Then on, obviously, just looking into the scholars that are there particularly. So in the sciences, I've got many friends who chose programs to work with one person in particular, and that's great. And if that person were to leave and go to another school, it's very common in the sciences that you as that graduate student will follow them to continue researching. In the humanities and arts, that is not common. So I had a great professor I was obsessed with, and he ended up leaving after my second year. I did not follow him. That was not an option. So to make sure that you've got in the humanities and arts, many different professors that you can really draw from is the last factor that I'll suggest.
I might briefly throw into the mix as well that I feel like a lot of the conversation, and certainly my brain first went to thinking about PhD as the grad degree you're talking about, but also I got a master's degree prior to entering this program. Thinking about prior experiences that might help you determine a PhD program, which is, you know, maybe the goal of getting the master's in at least my case. I wonder if some of you might have thoughts about that piece, the master's that is frequently costs money instead of pays you money, as a sort of potential middle piece between deciding on a PhD program or deciding, maybe looking back to deciding you wanted to get a master's degree.
I mean, I'll just say, like, especially in history, and probably this is similar in other humanities, I don't think getting a master's is worth it. They're expensive and not really, like, how should I put this? It's like there are people in my program that came in with masters, and that's great. Sometimes they have a little bit of a leg up in terms of knowing a little bit more about what they want their project to be about. But like, for example, I did not have a master's. I came in like very fresh, like very vague idea of what I wanted to do, had been out a couple of years from, you know, college or whatever, and it was fine. And that's normal. And so like, I just think, I won't speak to other disciplines, but you know, for history, I would imagine probably the same for other humanities. I don't think it's worth going into debt for a master's. It's not going to have a significant impact on, like, you know, you being a more attractive candidate than someone else. Like, so I don't know, that's just my 2 cents, but if others on the panel want to disagree, go for it. But yeah.
Spiking timing. So I did, for context, I went to the University of Virginia, where they had a 5-year accelerated master's program for public policy. And so I did that program and served as a TA, and so it was free. So all the advice I'm giving you is out of the spirit of, like, between res life and working as a TA, I did not pay for this master's. But I will say, like, I'm always torn, because I think the master's, for someone who wanted to do policy work, it set me up very well to get a job and at a higher level than I would have if I'd only had a bachelor's. So like, at the same time, what I thought, like, I had a vague understanding of, oh, these are the policies I want to work on. It was only after working in the policy space that I had a very clear understanding, like, oh, yes, the things I thought I wanted to do, like, this is actually it. These are the programs, these are the policy levers. And now that informs my PhD research and the questions that I'm asking. And so it's tough, because like, if you don't necessarily need the master's, like, the master's takes time, so it would be faster to go straight through. But at the same time, like, getting the master's, getting work experience helps really narrow you down, so that way you can be really focused, because, you know, the PhD life is a gauntlet, and you want to make sure you can always come back to, like, These are the questions I care about. This is what I'm doing. And so having that kind of early experience in graduate school, early experience in work is important. I will say though, the master's experience is very different. Like at least for like the master's I received, it was more of a cohort feel, whereas the PhD is like more of individual focus. And so your experience is going to be very different. And like the research for like, you, as a master's, you're like still consuming a lot of information. Whereas like for the PhD, you're going to be expected to generate more information. And so that's just going to mean you might approach your classes very different. And then the last thing I'll say is, I don't necessarily think it has to be an either or. I think what I tell my like people who are younger than me and friends, I'm like, oh, well, if you're wondering whether or not you should get a master's, you should go to a PhD program that has a breakaway master's. So that way, you know, you go in, you figure out like, this isn't for me. Okay, I will walk away with my master's. And guess how much you paid for that master's degree? Absolutely nothing. And so I will say that's like, I mean, PhD programs don't like that. I'll be very upfront because they want you to get the PhD, but you are not there to serve their interests. You're there to serve your own interest. And so I think that is something just to keep in mind also. But I do think having had work experience and just real world experience does really help you out a lot in terms of what's your question, are you excited about it, and can you wake up every day thinking about that question for 5 or 6 years?
Yeah, I actually wanted to add a little bit onto that. So in my field, there's really two very different kinds of master's degrees. There's like intensely research-based and very much course-based master's degrees. So it's either you're doing your own research most of the time or you're taking classes most of the time. I actually did a research-based master's. That was very helpful for me for figuring out that I did want to go to grad school and what I want to do research in. But I would just sort of like to put this on the radar that I can only speak for my field, so I can only speak for physics, but a lot of coursework-based masters are very exploitative. Really what they are is you just take the same graduate courses that the PhD students take, except you're paying full tuition to take them, whereas the PhD students are getting paid to do their work. It's unfortunate this happens at a lot of elite institutions that have very prestigious PhD programs, but honestly, the master's is a scam. Like, I hate to say it, but you have to be really careful when looking at master's programs in, I think, at least the pure sciences, because it can be very different depending on if it's coursework based or research based, because you might end up paying a bunch of money to sit in the same classroom as your peers who are taking that course for free or being paid to take that course. So I'd be very careful with that in the sciences, I'd say.
I like all these points a lot. So I'm in biology and it's a very similar thing. And I think the way I see it now, I asked myself this question of should I do a master's before I did a PhD program? And the way I see it now is the experience and the knowledge I would have learned in a master's, I learned in my first year as a PhD. A lot of research-based PhD programs, at least in biology and sciences, will include rotations where you do get a feel for what it's like to work in a lab. And your first year or two, you are taking a lot more coursework and learning those skills you need to be a full-time researcher. So I would propose an alternative to a master's that doesn't cause you paying to learn that through experience. I'd say do the undergraduate research. I love working with undergraduates in the lab. A lot of graduate PhD students do. It's really fun for us. It gets us away from our normal day-to-day. And then there are options that I didn't know about as an undergrad, which include postbacks. So there are a lot of universities offer these options that are 1 to 2 year programs. Specifically, I know of several people who have done this at the NIH. And this is an opportunity where you're paid, you're working for a lab, but you're gaining that experience. And that's often what it takes for people to build up their resumes. Getting into PhD programs, I think, was extremely challenging this year for the students I worked with. But if you don't have that experience, doing a master's isn't your only option. You can work as a tech, you can do a postbac, you can go into industry and work for a year or two. You have a lot of flexibility with options that will pay you to also be learning at the same time.
Can we add also, I guess, to the industry point, like something to keep in mind Like the PhD is the one degree, one of the few degrees where you do not get like a huge pay bump also like from that experience. So I think that's something to keep in mind as well. I think in terms of like the payoff of like what, you know, if you take on debt and all these other things, right? Like if you were to go get like an MBA, an MPP, or some other masters, like a lot of times you'll see like an increase in what your earnings would be if you were to go out in the market. And like the relative increase from a master's to a PhD like is not that great. Like it's PhD is like if you want to go and keep academia open as an option, like yes, then you kind of need it. But like for a lot of things, you might be able to get away with just which depending on what you want to do and what you want to get out of graduate school, I think it's important to think about what does a PhD get you and what does a master's get you and what do you need to do what you want to do. So I think that's something to keep in mind also, given both the costs for both and the payout for both.
I'll just add the last little bit in favor of masters, even though I don't disagree with what anyone has said in the slightest, but for me, I thought a master's was pretty integral. I'm not sure if it's imposter syndrome, but I think I needed the preparation and what I learned in the master's program. My program was at a very small liberal arts school, Miami University, and the program was not funded, but they had 2 scholarships every year that would fund you to go through master's. When I decided to go back to grad school and contacted them, they said, great, we already gave away the 2 scholarships, but you can still come. Would you like to come or would you like to wait? And I was like, I would very much like to wait, thank you. So you can check to see about scholarships opportunities for master's programs, especially if you're in a field where a master's might be a terminal degree. Someone came to, this is terrible research. Some person came to Northwestern. I don't remember the details, but they said in general in academia, there's about $15 million left on the table in fellowships every year that just go unused because people don't apply. So getting in touch with Office of Fellowships and doing a little bit of, really quite easy research online can go a long way.
Thank you. Yeah, I will just second that plug, which is to say that truly only upon becoming a graduate assistant in the Office of Fellowships did I get a better sense of how many different foundations, organizations exist that really want to fund your grad school for you or want to help you do that. So that is out there. That really is. So schedule an appointment. I want to build on to this conversation using one of the questions that I found in chat, which is again about the period between undergraduate and grad school, but more specifically about if you're not getting a master's degree, what about working? What about that sort of thing? So I'm going to post this question in chat here and I'll read it. What advice do people have on working before grad school? I've heard a lot of varying pieces of advice. I've heard getting experience is always good, but also going into industry often discourages people from later pursuing a PhD. Any advice on a type of work, how long, etc.? Or if you have had such an experience working between any of your degrees, how did that inform the next step after that for you?
So I did work in industry. I worked as a lab technician after undergraduate, but before graduate school, I already knew I was going to do my PhD and was already applying within that year anyway. So it was a very short time for me. However, because it was a short time, I basically came right out of undergrad, and I think I was much less experienced than a lot of my PhD cohort. I felt that many of them were very well prepared for graduate school and were able to really hit the ground running. They didn't need hands-on mentorship, and I did, which was also totally fine. You find a mentor who suits your needs, but I don't think that working in industry hurts any scientists that I know of. I know people who worked up to 5 years in industry out in the Bay Area at well-known companies, Biorad, and doing things that gave them not only lab experience, but just general maturity and knowledge about the situation. But I see the second side of the point where you personally, if you think you'll lose motivation, but there's also nothing wrong with getting a job after experiencing that and deciding that you're really happy and that you don't need that PhD. So I think working and building up any kind of experience is a great opportunity and can inform you on if the PhD is really what you want. And at the very least, it gives you a new set of skills and an idea more so of what you like.
Yeah, actually, if I can add on a little bit to that. So I will say that I didn't really have much time working between my undergrad and my PhD, but I will say that some of the sort of, let's say, wisest or happiest PhD students in my cohort are all people who did work between their undergraduate and their PhD program. There's the very obvious surface level stuff of they have some savings from their time working, so they're not completely put out if they have a financial emergency, which can be difficult on a grad student stipend. But I think just more broadly, they are just from like, if you spend time working between undergrad and grad school, you're just a lot more familiar with what it means to just be in a normal workplace. I think that's really important because academia, I think, likes to pretend it isn't a normal job, but it is a job. And grad students, we call ourselves students, but we're working for the university. We teach and we do research. And I think the students who were in industry before coming to grad school have a lot of experience that helps them navigate any sort of workplace conflicts. And what I think is most important that I see is it has set them up better for establishing work-life balance, which can be really difficult in grad school. And I'm sure it's already very difficult for people in undergrads, I'm sure a lot of you know. But I have found that the students who were in industry before coming here have a better sense and idea of how to treat this as work that you leave at the end of the day, so you can still have the rest of your life to live, as opposed to sometimes if you go straight through, and this is what happened to me from undergrad to grad school, you can be so absorbed into that academic culture that you're thinking to yourself, any minute that I'm not working on my thesis is a minute wasted, and I have to work weekends and I have to work nights. Whereas my friends who are in industry are like, oh, that's nuts. That's work. Leave work, take a weekend. And I think they're much better off for it, honestly.
Yeah, kind of building on that, I just think like it's really important to give yourself a break. Like undergrad is intense, grad school is even more intense, like especially those first couple of years. It's rough. Like, I'm not going to lie to you. It can be a little bit rough. I'm not trying to scare people. I think it's really valuable and worth it in lots of ways, but it's like, I think that I benefited a lot from having that like 3-ish year break and just being able to be a regular person who like goes out on the weekends and like is irresponsible in my early 20s. Like, I mean, that's fun. Like you should allow yourself to have fun and just like be a person, and also like kind of adjust to being an adult. It's a big shift, like coming from college to kind of, you know, living potentially in your own, like, I guess some of you probably already live in your own apartments, but just like, who knows, like, you know, there's just lots of things that are kind of new when you're at that age. And so I think it can be really beneficial. And the other thing I'll say too is like, I did have a little bit of anxiety when I was applying, being like, oh, I haven't been working in history, like I haven't been practicing history, I haven't been researching, I haven't been really doing anything related to history. I was very much working in this like nonprofit, like advocacy organizing type of world. And like, in the end, it was fine. In the end, like I wrote my letters about like what I was interested in. And yeah, I did make a point to sort of like read like stuff when I could, right? You know, like historical works and broader works that kind of talked about history, but like, it was fine. You know, like what they're looking for is that you have an interest, a passion, that you are like a strong writer, right? Like that is one thing. I think if you can like just make sure you have some friends or someone else who can like read your applications, make sure the writing is solid, that's going to be really important, especially for humanities, social sciences degrees. But other than that, I don't think it inherently harms you to be like, yeah, I worked at like Google for a couple of years, or I was a waiter for a couple of years, and now I want to go back to grad school because I'm really passionate about XYZ issues. So just like to kind of put that out there, that I don't think it's like you've ruined something if you like go work in some field for a couple of years and then decide, no, I actually want to do this. So yeah.
Agree with everything everyone said. I will say I want to flag some things to consider. I think having done the work experience, like I'm a big advocate, like take some time away, get recharged, get re-energized, be an adult. One thing is time, like looking long-term towards your life, like going to grad school, especially if you go to a different city away from family, right? Like you're like And if you go straight through, you could be 26, 27, 28 when you finish your PhD. When you work a couple of years, now you're going to be like 30, 31, 32, 33. If you're thinking about like, what does that mean for having stability in your life, like being settled, staying like, build family life, all those things kind of, the PhD can make things easier on some fronts, it could make things harder on other fronts. And so that's something to consider. Another thing, like, yes, you get paid as a PhD student. If you work and then come back to PhD life, that is a big pay cut, most likely. And so that is an adjustment to make. And it's, the opportunity cost, as folks in econ departments would like to highlight, that you have to consider in getting a PhD. And that kind of goes back to, what does that mean for your long-term life, right? Like, you're not saving for retirement in the same way as like someone who's working and has a 401k. Like, you'll have a PhD, like that's not going to be a huge like setback, but it is something to go in eyes wide open in. And I have friends who like work at JP Morgan and do all these other things, and they're like living their lives. But something I like notice, like, oh, they're able to do all these things because they're working, and comparison is the thief of joy. So I'm not saying like I'm dissatisfied with my decision, but those are the costs I had to consider. And like, yes, now you have to like pivot accordingly. So just some things to consider and keep in mind when you come back to school. Like, yes, working first, and then coming back helps you with your research questions, focus, all of those things. You can be an adult, you're like a full person when you come back to grad school, but it comes with some costs you want to consider, or potential cost considerations.
If I could just add, I feel like I got a lot of advice telling me that I should like take some time off and work in between. And I kind of went straight. I graduated a semester early, took a semester off, and then did a funded master's before doing the PhD at Northwestern. So it really feels like kind of going straight through, because the semester off is not much. But I will say, in my experience, you just have to kind of know yourself, because I worked all throughout college. I worked in high school, working like understanding like what it means to be in a workplace. Like all of those things were already really ingrained in me. So I don't think I needed that in between moment as much. But if you know yourself and you're like, I have never had a 9-to-5 period, that might be something you want to take on before, getting into the academy. So I think you also have to just like evaluate your own set of experiences. I think the question also asks like how long in between, like if you do decide to take a break. I do think it does get harder to go back once you start reaching year 5, 6, 7 being away, because the first couple of years of a grad school program, it is coursework, it is going to classes again, and just like being reacclimated into that. Like, I think the longer that you're out, it can be difficult, certainly not impossible, but difficult. I will also just say that if you're applying for a program that has GREs are good for 5 years, I think. So that's also a good I guess like measure of how long you want to stay out, because you really don't want to retake the GREs again. They're kind of pointless. So if you like do it, you give yourself a couple years and then you start to apply right before they expire, that also works. But yeah, you are going to get a lot of mixed messages, but I think you have to take stock of like who you are, what you know about your work ethic, and yeah, how I think, as Sheridan said, also like, do you want to be 34 finishing a PhD? Do you want to be in your late 20s? Do you want to give up your 20s to a PhD program? Like, there are kind of all of these considerations. So yeah, I would just also encourage folks to like think about their holistic life and what they want for themselves, which you don't have to create like a 5-year plan or anything like that, but just kind of a general sense of what your life could possibly look like.
I want to jump in here because I'm mindful of the time. I'm loving the responses and the engagement. I have one question that I want to pose that I think builds on some of what we were talking. And then I have a handful of questions from students. So we might lightning round of like 2 people jump in or 1 person jumps in, and we can go from there. But I will say also that near the end of the meeting, I might ask our panelists if they don't mind sharing an email address. So if you do, attendees, wish to specifically seek out an answer to a question or want to engage further, that's a possibility with these panelists. With me, my inbox is open as well, and I can share that, and with the office in general. Switching gears. So I'm going to post this in chat now. What might you advise your undergraduate self on topics of work-life balance, time management, and responsibility, or what would you have wanted to know about grad student life as an undergrad?
I mean, I would just say, like, you know, nothing is more important than your own like mental health and your family. And so like, don't let academia like make you feel like that's your only site of like self-worth, or that it's more important than the things that make you human and are life affirming. That can be really hard because a lot of the culture of academia is to do just that, like to make you feel lesser, to make you feel like you're constantly competing or whatever. But yeah, something I wish I had kind of I've gotten better at internalizing it now, but I think something I wish I had internalized earlier is just that, like, you know, the academy doesn't love you back. It's your family, it's your friends, it's your community that loves you back and that cares for you. And so yeah, like do good work hard, like write and work on what you care about, but also like it's nothing in this world of academia that is worth your own kind of like mental and physical deterioration. And it doesn't make you like a failure or less of a person for taking that time, you know, to restore yourself. So yeah.
Let's see. It's just been a pleasure to hear from all the other fellows. This has felt like a group therapy session for me in some ways, but just to hear your stories is wonderful. I'm glad that this question came up because I feel like I really am talking to some earlier version of myself, especially since, you know, for bandwidth reasons, we can't see everybody joining us. But if I would have to say something, so I'm just gonna put it out there. I'm fixing to be 36 years old. I'm gonna finish this year. Maybe I'll finish next year. My dissertation's done. There are other reasons why you delay graduation. So one of a few things I would say, you don't need to know exactly what your trajectory is, and you don't have to have a clear, straight path to get there. Taking time to think, doing things, or as a teacher of mine would say, learning things that aren't immediately useful are not bad things. This is all your life, all of these experiences is your life. So for me, when I do start to think about sort of the norm in America of, you know, people my age and the kind of job trajectories, this comparison is the thief of joy thing, I can get extremely anxious. I can feel really bad about it. But when I come back to myself, I realize I've never felt like myself in any other context than when I am doing the work that is so important to me and devoting my life to the sort of pursuit of, you know, histories that aren't talked about, things that I want to know, me as a person, and I want other people to know. That is joyous and special, and academia is a way to do that other walks of life doesn't necessarily support. So I can get down and feel really bad and think like, am I going to have a baby? Am I going to be too old? I don't know. When it comes down to how you spend your life and who you spend it with and what you do, that is a reason that grad school, with the sort of things that you potentially lose by following that path, can still be really worth it.
Yeah, that was lovely. And I also just want to add that, yeah, like grad school has been the opportunity to really do the thing that I love. Like, and that's like the reason I always knew I was going to go to grad school is there really was just no other way for me to be able to spend my time being paid to do physics and to answer the questions that I want to answer. And even throughout my PhD, I've changed my research focus until I was at a point where I actually just felt excited every day about the questions I was going to be answering. And that's honestly something, I think probably the biggest thing I would want to tell my undergraduate self is that make sure in grad school, firstly, you go to a grad school that's going to let you be flexible with those things, and give yourself the time to be flexible, to sort of change your path until you can find the thing that you really want to focus on that really like gets you out of bed every day in the morning.
I might hop in to start what I am on the fly calling lightning round of maybe one or two people jumping in. And I will say at this time that I have more time after this hour. I scheduled this for an hour. If you, an attendee or panelist, care to stick around beyond then, I am glad to continue to lead the conversation or become less formal. Feel no need to stick around beyond then. Okay, cut. Lightning round, a first question is, what does it mean for a PhD program, or maybe your research, I will add, to be interdisciplinary?
I could take that one. Sheridan, do you want to?
I would just jump in. I think there's always a difference between interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. So sometimes programs are multidisciplinary, meaning that there are multiple, like faculty, you might have a sociologist, political scientists, and some other discipline, and they teach you the perspectives of those lenses. I think for me, for at least from what I've seen in my program, interdisciplinary is when you're actually using all of those different lenses to help craft your research questions, your methodology, and your designs. And so I think generally interdisciplinary is like the buzzword that gets thrown out. A lot of times things are multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary because they teach different perspectives. But inter is like when you're actually pulling them all together to shape research questions and methods.
Yes, I agree with all of that. And I guess the only thing I would just add is that, yes, you are pulling on different methods to answer a question. And in that, it can also be creating your own method, right? And so it's not just like, it can look like a combination of sociology and literature kind of methods to answer a question, or it could be kind of forming its own thing. And what that also means, so I'm in Black Studies. Because of my work and being on the job market, I can apply to Black Studies programs. I work in literature, so I can apply to English programs. I can apply to American Studies jobs and gender and sexuality, because those are kind of like my fields of research, and African studies, other kind of formulations of Black Studies. So interdisciplinary could also mean gaining a skill set that makes you legible to multiple markets. And that doesn't mean that if you're a historian, you're not legible to multiple markets either, but it just is kind of a way of talking about your research and talking about your methods that's collaborative, I guess I would say, that can make you perhaps more marketable, or marketable in a different way when you're applying for academic jobs, if you choose to go that way.
I want to briefly just tack on to that in the way that I think about multidisciplinary, interdisciplinarity. I think of music as sort of my media home, but then I'm reaching into science and technology studies and different political studies or historical studies for Cold War stuff, that in terms of my own research, that is essential to me, because I want, like talking about legibility, that I want to be able to translate my research to be relevant and exciting for other people too. And that's sort of the through line for me. When I think about interdisciplinarity done well, or like truly interdiscipline where I am in two homes, that's the goal for me, is being more accessible, being making bridges between these things. Okay, sorry to like cut in and then pose the next question, but what is some advice that you have for an undergraduate who is generally interested in grad school, but is not sure what field they like the most?
A master's degree. Sorry. A master's degree is useful if you have a vague sense, because I don't know, I'll only speak from my own experience. Theater undergrad. Then I went back to a master's program in theater, but theater is a very wide field, right? There's performance studies, there's this very theoretical, there's theater history, and then there's practice and all of the things that come along with it. And a master's program normally has a bit more flexibility for you to sort of do the spectrum of those things to help you finesse. Yeah, so if you have a vague clue, a master's could be useful for you. And then if you don't, I'm going to let someone answer that because I'm not sure.
So I would say interdisciplinary, again, this is maybe sciences specific, but I think it applies to everyone. An interdisciplinary program that gives you flexibility in choosing your mentor. So I'm in a program where people in my cohort work in chemical engineering, they work in synthetic biology, they work in physics, they work in just molecular biology, which is what I wanted to do. But it's also useful in putting you in contact with people in your cohort who do other things that are similar, because it gives you a way to explore other things you might like through rotations. So that's how I chose to do it.
Yeah, just really quickly, I'd also throw in, like, during your remaining time in undergrad, see if you can do some, and this is very science specific, I guess, some, like, join a lab, perhaps, see if you like that type of research they're doing in whatever field you might be considering. You can also even just go to some grad level courses and see if they pique your interest.
There are also lots of fellowships available for you to do things like, I don't know, I did an undergraduate summer fellowship where they just gave me money to research any topic I proposed and to write a thesis paper. So I was like, I want to do intercultural theater and please send me to France and I'll write this big paper. So that gave me a sense. My feedback on that paper was, you clearly have no idea how to write a thesis, but my goodness, I admire your tenacity. That was the first time I actually did like a big project, did my own research design. So there's lots of, oh my gosh, the Office of Fellowships will steer you in the right direction. There's so many wonderful foundations and things that are just like waiting to fund great research. So you can do that as a way to try something out, but to work it into an undergraduate career, make sure that's part of your time there.
Also, just talk to people. Like, you have professors now, right, that have done the grad school thing. You take a class with someone, you're like, this is really cool, or here's a project. Set up office hours. Like, if you're genuine, your enthusiasm, and have like a really specific question about, I'm interested in this, what can I do? There are resources. People will talk to you about it. So I just encourage you to send that email and to make that appointment, because I think it could be really exciting. Final thoughts on this, so that I don't have to be the last voice on that. An additional question as we run out of time. I'm gonna, yes, Beth.
Just going to, on this topic of master's degrees that allow you to experiment, I want to give a plug for arguably my favorite fellowship program, but the one I think is least well known in the US, and that is the Erasmus Plus or the Erasmus Mundus 2-year master's degrees. I have worked with many students for whom they were transformative for precisely these reasons. They had not experimented as much with rotating among fields and doing as much independent research as they might have liked as undergrads, but they thought they wanted to go to graduate school. These are 2-year programs in 3 different countries, 3 different universities. There are 140 of them, and I always say they're very interdisciplinary, but they're very narrow. So if you know your area of interest, but you're not sure which discipline you wish to use to tackle it, it allows you to rotate through. So just, they're my favorite, but in general, European master's degrees tend to be built on a rotational principle more so than the US, where they're housed in departments on average. So please come talk to us, because the other thing is they offer scholarships to bring in international students. They're new in Europe. They only started in about 2000. And so there are still these scholarship programs. And if I can have anyone who's in that space leave with one thing, it's that there are actually more options than you think, and please come talk to us.
Thank you for putting emails in chat. I just want to, for everyone here, I just want to draw your attention to that. If there was someone here in a field you find interesting, or someone whose story resembles yours in ways that lead you to want to learn more, please do follow up. And with that, I'm going to say that this is the 1-hour mark. And if you must leave, or you have other responsibilities, this is where we will end. But if you want to stick around for maybe a more casual back and forth, or if you want to unmute camera or video, and this is for everyone, then feel free, and I will stick around.